Today we kick off a topic that I'm really incredibly passionate about because I'm convinced that this topic is one of those things that Satan is trying to tear down and destroy. And the best way to destroy, in my opinion, I think the best way to destroy a community, a society, to turn people away from the Lord is to tear down the home, just tear down families. And we see time and time again that happens as Satan attacks our marriages. And so for the next couple weeks, we're going to be talking about marriages on the rocks. Or marriage on the rock. Or on the rocks. Well, sometimes it's a good marriage, and marriages are good and great and wonderful. I was told between services. A marriage is like a deck of cards. In the beginning, all you need is a couple hearts and a diamond. And sometimes at the end, you wish you had a couple clubs and a spade. Unfortunately, that's it. Listen, Satan is attacking marriages, and tearing down families. And here's the thing, moms, dads. Here's the thing: our relationships are a visible display of God to our children. They're a visible display of covenant love to our children. Marriages are taking quite the hit today, and so we're going to dive into marriages for the next couple weeks, talking about biblical marriages. I guess the first place we're introduced to marriages in the Bible is in Genesis chapter 2. Genesis chapter 2, verse 18, the Lord God said, "It's not good that the man should be alone, and so I will make him a helper fit for him." So now out of the ground the Lord had formed every beast of the field and every bird of the heavens and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called the living creature, that was its name. And the man gave names to all livestock and birds of the heavens and beasts of the field. But for Adam, there was not found a helper fit for him. I love this picture because you have this picture of Adam standing there and the animal coming through. And Adam's saying, "Oh, that's cool. God, that's cool. Giraffe. But that's not my thing, you know? Impressive, God. Big ears, big trunk. Elephant. We'll call it elephant, God, but I don't know if that's my helper." Porcupine. Confusing. Weird. Let's call that a porcupine, but that's not my thing. And so eventually what happens is, in verse 21, the Lord caused the deep sleep to fall upon the man. And while he slept, he took one of his ribs and closed up its place with flesh. And the rib that the Lord had taken from the man, he made, he made it into a woman and brought her to the man. And the man said, "Hubba, hubba." Just kidding. The man said, "At last, the bone of my bones, the flesh of my flesh. Because she shall be called woman because she was taken out of man." And therefore, the commentator adds, "Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." That's the origins of marriage, and I'm convinced today that this is an important topic for us. And so here's the thing. I know we have a wide variety of people that are here today. Some of you are married. Some of you are happily married. I know there's a difference. I know some of you are single. Some of you have been married and you're no longer married. Some of you are looking forward to marriage one day. I want to ask you, regardless of where you are on that journey, I guess, I want to ask you to hold fast to these principles, because as we discuss these principles, they apply whether married or not. We're focusing on marriage, but I'm telling you, they apply to every aspect, regardless of where we are in that. I'm convinced that most marriages and the idea of marriage even as a culture is shifting, and it's because culture is shifting. See, the view of marriage isn't what it once was, isn't the biblical view of marriage. Marriage as a society, it's seen as something that you could avoid or maybe should avoid. And the reason behind why you should avoid marriage in our world today is largely, here's the reason that I hear more times than I'd like to confess. The reason I'm told you should avoid marriage is because divorce is expensive. Now, while that might be true, that's not the point. That's not your focus. Marriage is seen as an outdated institution that can and should be avoided at all costs. You know, we live in a world the past several years where there's been this outcry that there's and I hesitate going here, but I will because whatever. There's been this outcry of a redefinition of marriage for the past several years. But I'd say that we have the onus of that responsibility on us because we haven't really lived up to a biblical standard of what marriage is anyway. Marriage should be seen different in the world around us. Christians, people who claim the name of Christ, should display and portray a marriage that's vastly different from our world. Here's my point. I'm kind of shocked sometimes when I get phone calls and messages from people asking if I'll come and do their wedding. Yeah, I'm happy to do it. Listen, if you're getting married, I'd love to do your wedding. That's wonderful, great, fine, great. But if you're not a Christian, if I don't know you and you don't know me and you're calling just to find a pastor to do a wedding, I've got to ask, why? What drives you to do that? Because what we do here in the church is much different from what a marriage is in our world. True, today when I officiate a wedding, I'm officiating and I'm joining together by the power given to me by the Commonwealth of Kentucky and the legal aspect of that. But that's not my primary focus, nor should it be. See, our world sees marriage as like this image here. The world sees marriage as a line that connects two individuals. This is a legal contract, a joining, so now you're legally bound together, right? That's the way it's kind of seen. Marriage, biblical marriage, is much more than just a tax status. See, what we need to see is redefine marriage as to what it is, and it's a covenant relationship between two individuals and God. It's not just two people saying, I'm committing. It's two people saying, I'm committing, and God as our witness. It's a three-way covenant. The interesting thing about this image is you see the husband on one side, the wife on one side, God at the top of that. As the husband and or the wife get closer to God, this was pointed out to me this past week, as they get closer to God, they get closer to each other. Now, isn't that neat? Isn't that neat? Here's the thing, our society has painted a really bad picture of what marriage is. It's much more than just a tax status. It's an oath, it's a promise of lifelong loyalty and commitment to one another. Part of our problem is that we've made marriage simply a legal contract and not a covenant. A second reason why marriage is failing in our world today is because we set ourselves up for failure because of this weird word, expectations. Like we all know here that The Notebook is just a movie, but my love story is going to be special. I'm going to find the one and she will complete me. Well, maybe we haven't all said that, but we probably have. And we've all, our relationships is going to be the exception, and it's going to be all rainbows and butterflies and smooth sailing on a waveless sea. And that's great until the storm comes. And then all of a sudden you look around and you say, well, this isn't what I expected. This isn't what I signed up for. This is hard. The idea of, the idea of marriage, of two becoming one, by nature is hard. It's conflict. It's friction by nature. And so we enter that world and we expect things to be wonderful and good and great, and they certainly are until they're not. And again, it's when the two hearts and the diamond become the desire for spades and clubs, right? Like things get weird and hard and tricky and uncomfortable. And what once drew us together is now a reason to want to stab you in the eye. Sorry, too much, too far? Okay, let me. Just kidding. It gets tricky, it gets hard, it gets difficult. And it's largely because our expectations are bad expectations. We know intellectually that it's just a movie and it's just a picture, and we know that marriage is tough, but then we get into it and we start to realize, man, It can't be the issue with me. It's got to be my person, so maybe a new person will make it better. That never happens. See, we buy into this myth that there's this one person who will complete me, who will fulfill me, who will meet my every desire, and I meet their desire. And everything is perfect and good and great. But here's the thing, that one is never going to accomplish what that promise is. It's a myth. That person will never complete you. That person will never be able to make you happy. That person will never be able to provide completely what you need. Why is that? Because that person is not qualified to do that. It's not their job. It's not their ability. Have you ever thought about what your deepest needs are? Like not food, water, shelter. Like those are needs, but like needs to a soul level. A pastor by the name of Jimmy Evans, he writes about these 4 areas. He says he's convinced that every relationship drives trying to satisfy these 4 areas of need. He starts off with acceptance. Every relationship craves acceptance. This idea of knowing that you are loved and needed by others. We all desire that. We all have that as a deep need in our life. The second thing that he puts out there is identity. Knowing that you are individually significant and special. He says we all desire that. We all work for that in our lives. Number 3, security. Knowing that you're protected and you're provided for. Think about how that drives us in our lives. Finally, he says purpose, knowing that you have a reason for living. I'm convinced that most, if not all, of our marital problems come when we focus on trying to fulfill one of those needs in a way that God has not orchestrated for us to happen. Whether you've realized it or not, these needs have been motivating you throughout your life. All of us are driving in some way, in some avenue, to find a way to satisfy these needs. And so let me ask you, who do you look to satisfy these needs? These needs of acceptance, identity, security, and purpose. Who do you look for? Now, you're smart people, and I know that you're sitting there and your eyes are kind of rolling in the back of your head like, okay, Pastor. Like, I know the right answer is Jesus, right? Because it's Sunday morning and we're here at church. And like, you're like, okay, yeah, okay, thanks, hokey pokey, you know? Like, of course the answer is Jesus. Yes. But let me ask this. If we know here that the answer is Jesus, why don't we live as if it's Jesus? See, so often, like, we'll know the answer is, like, yes, and I know that sounds so hokey, and you're thinking, give me a break. The answer is Jesus, but many of us know that answer, yet we live as if it's not. In fact, the fact that we know that answer and fail to live up to that is largely a root to our problems. We all know that we desire acceptance, identity, security, purpose, and while we know that the answer of those things is Jesus, instead of leaning into Jesus in his church, we work overtime to build a name for ourselves, or to build a bank account, or we lean into the arms of another who sees me and makes me feel special, or I build a wall around my life that no one, not even my spouse, can penetrate, because if I let them in, I will be vulnerable, I could be hurt. And so while we know the answer is Jesus, we don't live as if it is. Here's the thing, those 4 areas specifically related to a marriage will never be met by a spouse. And it's not because your spouse is terrible, it's because your spouse is just unable to do that. And don't think, well, maybe I just need a different spouse. No, here's the thing, none of us, no spouse, no individual can ever meet those needs. No one under the sun. These needs are designed within us, hardwired within us, I believe, to draw us into Jesus. To make us lean into Jesus. But what do? Instead of leaning into Jesus, we seek satisfaction elsewhere through a quicker or surer method. Maybe it's our spouse, and we think, well, what can my spouse do for me then? And it becomes about what my spouse does for me and how my spouse meets my expectations, or maybe it's my children, and we look for ways to be fulfilled through our children and our children's lives, and we pour and pour and pour into our children only to find one day that they grow and they leave the house and we're looking at strangers across the table from us. What we need to realize, instead of this idea that there's one person for us, we need to realize that Jesus is our one. And I know that sounds so hokey, but if we really apply that, our lives will be changed. Our marriages will be changed. Jesus told his disciples, they asked him and said, "Teacher, what is the greatest commandment?" He says, here's the simplest, the greatest commandment. Here it is. Love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. With everything you got, you love God, you lean into God, and everything else will work out. We know that's true here, but we often fail to live it out in our lives. With that being said, here's what I want to encourage us to do today. I want us to encourage us, if you're married today, to say, from now on, I don't want a normal marriage. See, a normal marriage, they're full of hurt and fear and regret and jealousy and anger and selfishness and disappointments. If you're here today and you're married, I want you to take this vow to not be okay with a normal marriage. I want us to consider and work to have an abnormal marriage. It's pictured more in the lines of what Jesus expected from his disciples. Instead of thinking about what is in it for me, I can start to think, what is in it for my spouse? How do I better serve my spouse? How do I represent Jesus in my home with my spouse? Here's the thing. In order to do any of this, we've got to acknowledge that our life, our marriages and our life, they're focused around something. So what is it that your life is focused around? What's the centerpiece to your life? Because here's the thing. Whatever is the centerpiece to your life, that drives everything else. Look at this. The center drives everything underneath it. So if the center is me, and I look at my marriage through the lens of what can I get out of it, how does this benefit me, that's going to impact my values and my beliefs. It's going to impact my actions and my decisions and how I live. And it's going to ultimately change my impact and the impact that I have on the world around me. If the centerpiece to my life is my children, that's going to directly impact everything underneath it. What we need as Christ followers who bear the name of Christ, what we need is to make Christ the centerpiece. And I know that sounds hokey, but hang with me. When we make Christ the centerpiece to our life, that changes every interaction we have in our life. It changes every interaction I have with my spouse. And I no longer see my spouse for failing to live up to my expectations. I see my spouse and I start to say, how can I serve my spouse? How can I take the same nature of Jesus, who humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on the cross? How do I represent Jesus in my home with my children? See, whatever's the centerpiece to our life is going to drive everything. So what's the centerpiece for you? I think marriages are under attack because we've lost the biblical representation of what marriage is. I think marriages are under attack because we have unfair expectations for marriages. I think one of those expectations that's unfair is the idea that marriage is to make us whole, is to make us happy. Gary Chapman, in a book, Sacred Marriage, he wrote, I don't think it's Gary Chapman. Some guy wrote a book called Sacred Marriage. Fantastic book. I'd encourage you to read it. In the opening chapter, he asks this. He says, what if marriage isn't about making you happy, but instead about making you holy? He later on will describe marriage as if it is marriage is God's gift to you. It's a full-length mirror, and if it had a tag on it, it would say, congratulations, here's to finding out the real you. And I thought, man, when I read that, I was like, that's pretty good. Because here's the thing, I'll let the cat out of the bag. I thought I was a pretty selfless guy before I got married. And all of a sudden I started realizing, man, I'm a lot more selfish than I thought I was. I thought I was a pretty good catch until I got married. Because I started seeing how every choice I made was often about me. What if marriage is not about making us happy, but about making us holy? Now, I'm not suggesting that happiness and holiness are on two different ends of the spectrum. In fact, I think it could be argued that you can't really live happy without living holy. Think about this. How can you truly be happy while harboring resentment and bitterness in your heart? How can you truly live a happy life while living selfishly? Being fueled by envy and greed. How can you live a happy life apart from holiness? I'd suggest that the Bible teaches us the best way to live a happy life is to live an obedient life. So if you want a happy marriage, live an obedient life. Over the past year and a half or so, we've noticed there's a lot of you all are younger folks, young 20s, maybe on the verge of looking forward to marriage. I'm so thankful and glad you're here. I want to address real quickly, if you're here today and you're not married and you're looking forward to one day, Lord willing, being married, I want to encourage you to do one thing now. And that's to resolve today what type of life you want to live then. See, there's this slide that's really bought into that says, well, just live, like one day you can, settle down. One day you can make Jesus a priority. Of course, I believe in God, and so we'll you kind of just live for me and kind of sow my wild oats. But one day I'll calm down and I'll settle down and I'll, make my spiritual life an important thing. There's this slide that says you can do that one day. But I want to encourage all of us to hear this today. Doing your own thing apart from God, it's a simple word called sin. And you can't build a Christ-centered future on a foundation of sin today. You can't build a life of righteousness in the future on a foundation of sin today. And so if you want to have a Christ-centered marriage one day, a Christ-centered home one day, then live today with Christ at the center. Choose today that I'm going to live an abnormal life and make sure that what drives me is not self, is not others, but what drives me is God and His direction for my life. Again, what's at the center will drive everything else. And so I know today is it could be accused of being a bit hokey, but I want to challenge us today to ask the question, what is at my center? What drives me? Here's the thing, if you're expecting your spouse to meet your needs, that's not going to work. If you're expecting your future spouse to meet your needs, you're going to be disappointed. You're setting yourself up for failure. Throughout the Bible, we see time and time again the constant reminder that he who puts his hope in the Lord will find strength. Jeremiah chapter 17, Jeremiah writes, "Blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord, whose trust is the Lord. He's like a tree planted by water that sends out its roots by the stream and does not fear when the heat comes. For its leaves remain green. It's not anxious in the year of drought. It does not cease to bear fruit." See, the problem in most of our world today, most of our marriages today, is not our spouse. More often than not, I would suggest that our biggest problem in our marriages and our homes is not our spouse. It's us. What's at the center of my life? What's at the center of my marriage? What's at the center in our home? My encouragement is that we make it Jesus. Now, next week, we're going to talk much more about practically making Christ the centerpiece of our marriages. In fact, in the end of the month, February 18th, on Friday nights, we're starting. We believe in enriching the marriages so much that starting February 18th, Emily McCauley has started a group that's going to be focusing on marriages. Every other Friday night, the women are going to go off and do a study, and the guys are going to go off and do a study. And we're gonna pour into our marriages to make them a priority in our ministry for the next year. We're already working on things to enrich marriages this next fall with a marriage retreat. Like we want to make sure that marriages are protected, that they're growing, that they're strengthened, because I'm convinced that our marriages and a godly marriage is going to impact so much in our society and so much in our culture. So let's invest to make it right. But it starts by making the decision, I don't want to live a normal marriage. I want an abnormal marriage where Christ is the center. And so the challenge is not looking at our spouse and saying, what's wrong? The challenge is to look at me and say, okay, am I living the life where Christ is my center? Single, married, or whatever. Am I living with Christ as my center? Does Christ direct my steps? And if not, perhaps today is the day we make it. We put him at the center.